with that.
To your other question, I am a BCBA and special educator. I have a master's in special ed. So I kind of had the luxury of like, I don't work in the public system. So I think it's totally different depending on the system that you're in, because I know a lot of BCBAs in the school system like do find it a little bit frustrating. And again, depending on where you are and what country and city and all of that, I've found it to be like an amazing like connection to be able to have that BCBA background and special ed. I've actually made a couple BCBAs as teachers, but again, I have that luxury of doing that. So I have BCBAs who run the classrooms, and they're able to like, it's a completely special ed school. So all the kids are some degree of special ed for whatever reason they're there. And some of the BCBAs run the classrooms, and they actually have some of their support staff are trained ITs. So they're able to implement like, individual plans and behavior management and reinforcement systems and things like that. So it really depends like on what the population needs. In what context were you referring to about how to mesh the two together? I find that when I would consult to classrooms, so when I first started there and I would just be consulting and I was like the BCBA who would like be called in for like behavior plans and stuff like that, I felt like I could never really finish the solution that I wanted to give them, because I could say like, oh, well, as an antecedent strategy, they need to learn how to tolerate no. And the teacher's like, well, that's not part of their IP. I'm not going to teach that. But like, they're going to have that behavior every time you tell them no, unless they have like a proactive teaching plan to help them prevent that. So it's not enough to give them like all these consequence strategies. I felt like I kept getting stuck without that ABA like antecedent strategy as such a strong focus in the classroom. So that's where we kind of came up with the idea of focusing on having an ABA be a part of the classroom in general. And I find that works a lot better than just having that consultative model. But either one of those are really options depending on the staff that you have to implement things.
So if you go into our resources at the very bottom of the page, very bottom on the second page, is ABA in schools. And there's some school data sheets here, etc., and just some data collection. Here's some teacher training materials that you can use. So take a look at that. But I agree. I mean, if you've got teachers and staff who are at different degrees of knowing ABA, it's really tough. And you also have teachers who teach a class of 20 or 30 students when, we're teaching like 2 to 3 at a time. So it's a lot easier for us to do something. So also when you're recommending strategies, think about that and saying, okay, well, what strategies are you able to implement in the classroom? And then what are the teacher abilities too? Sure, I think you've got it pretty awesome in terms of what you've got. I find that a lot of educators really love the Autism Helper. It's Sasha Long. She's a BCBA as well. She's got a lot of free stuff. She's got a lot of really great blogs. She is a teacher turned BCBA, and she's got lots of teacher materials here, etc. But she also does a podcast. I don't know if any of you guys have heard the Autism Helper. I listen to her all the time, and she's great. And what I find is that some of the first steps with her with teachers are going into classrooms where they may or may not have a great autism background, is to say, actually, you know what, I totally feel for you. I can't even imagine being in your shoes and what you go through. Right. But you sympathize with them, obviously, and then say, listen, get your buy-in, right? We're a co-creator of this. How do we do this together? What are some of your ideas? Or, hey, how about a schedule or something? And check out, this particular blog by Sasha, or check out this podcast. And they're like, oh, wow. And as soon as they start listening to her, she's pretty dynamic, that, a lot of teachers then get a bit more buy-in from that.
Yeah, so I was lucky that I didn't really have a lot of pushback. Like, I think that there was a lot of buy-in with what ABA has to offer because the value was just so clear. So I think that showing them what that value is and not overachieving. I think a lot of times we go in and feel like, well, they have to do it my way and take tons of data sheets and I have to have everything done exactly the way I want it to be. But if it's not done at all, then there's really even less value than how you started. So trying to provide a little bit of value in making the material for them, showing them how to use a visual schedule. Start small with something that's doable and with something that they'll see change in. And then going from there, because that's the biggest piece. The biggest piece is once you get the buy-in, I think that they'll see the value. And then like there's so many different ways to like, you know, make that combination work. But that's really the first step, is making everyone see like why they should even listen to you to begin with.
I like how you said start small too, Shira. You know, like I tend to be like, okay, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Because when I go in and see a student, I'm thinking, okay, wow, this is what needs to be done, right? Start small. Offer one doable task, and that's it. Don't do any more, because a teacher or a special educator can get very, very overwhelmed. And then think about you doing ABA on the teacher / EA just as much as you're doing ABA on the student, right? So, you know, Shira said, start with the buy-in and why, right? Why should this teacher adopt your methodology? And then go from there and start, you know, reinforcement, right? Reinforcement for the teacher, not just for the student. Reinforcement doesn't need to be a piece of chocolate, but reinforcement can be an email or a, hey, wow, this is really amazing. I love how you did this. All the rest of the stuff is garbage. Don't tell her that, but really reinforce what they are doing correctly.